We've had the discussion about money, and we've had discussion about hiring a contractor, and finally we've also had a discussion about how to begin the journey. Kind of the capstone, the fourth and last of these breakout sessions, is finding and using an electric coach. Bob Sewell is with the Go Electric DMV, which stands for, I think, DC, Maryland, Virginia. He's from the East Coast, lives in Virginia. And Pete Marsh is with Citizens Climate Lobby, works out of Southern California. And they're going to talk to you about how to find and use an electric coach. So I'll turn it over to them.
Hey everybody, good morning. Pete Marsh here in Long Beach, California. I won't talk long. My main job in this was to find somebody smarter than me, which isn't hard, but I found Bob Sewell in April. One of the many things that I've done in my electrification journey is I took a course from Rewiring America titled Electric Coaching Collaborative, and there were 200 of us from around the country in the cohort that April, and more every month since. Bob Sewell is one of the guides who helps mentor all of those coaches during that program. And so he's also founded this regional collaborative in his area, and he and I are both engaging with a national group that's seeking to make it easier to find volunteer electric coaches like us. So Bob, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Pete. I'm Bob Sewell. As Pete mentioned, I'm here in Alexandria, Virginia. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the electrifying and finding electric coaches. And we would certainly agree with everything that's been said before in terms of how to go about your electric journey, but sometimes people need a helper for that. So next slide, please. So we are volunteers. There are companies that do this, but I'm talking about the volunteer electric coaches. The ones that I'm familiar with and the ones that Pete just mentioned have been trained through this Rewiring America course, which is a 4-week course, quite an intensive amount of time that I've helped to teach since then. And it provides a lot of the fundamentals of what you've been hearing about in terms of how to electrify your home. And what we found is that a lot of the coaches that went through that course we're operating individually, and that it's better to operate as a group. And so that's why we founded Go Electric DMV in my area, and there are other organizations like that around the country that I'll talk about. The second thing that the coaches tend to have in common, in addition to some kind of a training program, and by the way, there are others. For example, there's Heat Smart Alliance in Massachusetts. There are other ways to get this training in addition to Rewiring America. But the second thing, we have all electrified our own homes, at least to some extent. I've fully electrified mine, like Robert has, and enjoying the benefits of that. And we also tend to be very motivated and really dedicated to this vision that electrification is not only a way to address the climate crisis, but it's the way to a better future. Next slide, please. So we got together as coaches into these groups because we want to make it easier for people to do what we've done. I know I would have loved to have had a coach when I was electrifying my own home. I think I did a pretty good job, but I could have done a better job with a coach. We get together because we're smarter as a group than we are individually. Each of us knows different things, has different experiences, and there's a lot of power in being a team. And then we just want to be a positive example to show other people what we've been able to do successfully. Next slide. So we're trying to create what we call a community of electrification champions. What a lot of research shows that the most effective communication is neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, relative to relative, not reading something in the paper or an advertisement. So we are neighbors working with our neighbors, and we have done this, and we can tell them how we've done it. One of the big things we would always preach as coaches that you've heard in all of the talks so far is the importance of planning, having a plan and prioritizing your efforts. This is usually a multi-year project. The other thing we like to make sure people understand is that there isn't sacrifice involved in doing this. And a lot of people talk about addressing climate change in terms of sacrifice or giving up things. What we will want people to understand is that electrification is making things better. Electric machines are just better. They're more comfortable. They're better performing. They're healthier, as well as being climate friendly. Next. So some of the benefits that you can get, and this is the recent showcase we had at my house and a bunch of our electric coaches and the t-shirts there in the photo. But we can provide information on solutions that are available. A lot of people don't know where to start to find solutions in terms of things like heat pump water heaters. We can give people options of both contractors and different options for heat pumps and so forth, and share our experiences with contractors, both successful ones and ones maybe to avoid. We can also provide, with our training, sanity check on contractor proposals. Particularly heat pumps can get complicated and people often need a lot of advice and assistance. A typical interaction with our clients is to have a Zoom session to start off and get to know them and their goals and priorities in their home. And then there's usually lots of emails back and forth with lots of questions that we can help answer. You've heard from others about the incentives that are available, and so those are very locally oriented and need to be understood in each area. And basically, we want people to become educated consumers. Most people know how to go about buying a car and how to do research on something like that, but they may not know about how to do that for heat pumps. And so we can help them be educated consumers. But in the end, we do need to have professional contractors who know what they're doing to do this work. Next. So you've heard from others, it's always best, we would always recommend starting with an energy audit and the recommended weatherization improvements for your home. It's kind of like going to the doctor for your annual checkup. You're almost guaranteed to learn something about your home that you didn't know, possibly something quite serious. I've had a recent client who had an energy audit and found that it was a very serious venting problem with her water heater, or gas water heater, which was a serious health issue in the house. So that was identified by the energy auditor. It's really important to focus on the goals and priorities. Every house is different, you've heard that, but every homeowner is different too. And a plan needs to be oriented towards that and some clear thinking about what people's priorities are and help them with that. So that's basically what electric coaches can do, help them with that plan. There's lots of benefits from having a plan in terms of understanding what needs to be replaced and when in your home, how that relates to your goals and priorities. Are there health concerns, for example, in the home? Are people primarily motivated by saving money or climate? And an electrification plan would be different depending upon those kinds of goals. And one of the big things that is when things die, you don't want to be there in the middle of the winter with a furnace that just broke, or in the middle of a shower with a hot water heater that just broke. You will have very few options. So we always recommend that people do their research ahead of time and get ahead of those needs to replace things. Because if you do it at the last minute when the thing is already broken, you're probably going to be sold another gas hot water heater, and you're certainly not going to get the best deal. So we always recommend that people plan ahead as part of that planning process. Next. So how to find one? You've heard a lot about Rewiring America already. That's where the planner that you heard about comes from. That's where the coach course comes from. There's also a Why Electrify course you can take for additional information on electrification. They will help you find a coach if you email them, but we're working on a better way that Pete alluded to help people with that. So if you go to the next slide. Around the country, there are a lot of groups like the one that I founded here in my Washington, D.C. area of Go Electric TMV. There's a similar one in Colorado that's been helping us get started. There's one in Oregon. There are lots of them around the country. They tend to go by these kinds of names, either Go Electric or Electrify. So if you Google search those kinds of titles, you will tend to find them. We're working on there's a network now of these groups meeting periodically to build a kind of a network or confederation and share resources. Right now, probably the best way to find them, other than a Google search, is through this Clean Energy Communities Fund website, where the collaborators list that you see there will show most of those organizations. And we can talk more about that in the breakout rooms. Next. So that's the end. This is our particular one in this area. Go Electric Colorado, for example, would have a similar website, and we just make available some basic information resources and then a way to get in touch with us to start that conversation. So with that, I will turn it back over to Robert. Sounds like you got a cold.
Yeah, just started coming on last night. So
folks who are joining us, welcome. And we're going to use the chat to prioritize questions. So if people want to enter questions that you have in the chat, we'll try to go through those as we proceed. And if you don't, we have lots of additional slides. So if you don't ask questions, we're gonna brief you to death. So hopefully,
Death by PowerPoint.
hopefully you'll be motivated to ask good questions.
There you go.
For anybody who's just joining us, as I mentioned a minute ago, please use the chat for your questions, and we will look through those and prioritize those and have a conversation with you all. We can elaborate on any of the points we hit during the main session. So I see we've got one already on the what do we do to educate? And that's a great question. And we kind of think of our mission in Go Electric DMV, and I know it's the same in some of the other organizations, is we do help people individually when they come to us with all the questions about, hey, I want to electrify my home, and lots of individual questions. But we also try to do a lot of what we call public outreach to get to the people who aren't yet coming to us. The way I put it is that a lot of our clients come to us from what I call the climate choir. So people like Pete and I, who are already members of Citizens Climate Lobby and other organizations that are lobbying for climate action and solutions. But the broader population isn't necessarily tuned into that channel. So we like to get the word out to those people as well. So we will go to any number of events, to tabling, and often partner with other climate-related or environmental groups in the area. Just the other day, I gave a talk on to a very large movie theater audience on my electric road trip to all the national parks in our electric vehicles 2 years ago, to talk about how you really can road trip in an EV. And so that was a great way to get to a broader audience. I was on the Weather Channel the other day talking about how electric coaches can help people to electrify their homes. So, but that is something I will say is a work in progress, because you got to be able to get to people where they are. And if they're not already part of the climate choir, they're not coming to church to hear the sermon. So that's something we're still working on ideas on. Let's see. There are other questions. So I don't know there's a Quit Carbon. I am familiar with them. I do not know if they are only in certain areas or all over the country. Do you know, Pete?
I do know they are primarily the California's San Francisco Bay Area. They have a smaller presence in Southern California, and I don't believe they are in any other states yet. That could be in their future. But there are a couple of groups like them, and I'm struggling to think of the names. One is Elephant Energy, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that.
Yeah.
So there are some companies that do this as businesses. And you heard the term concierge in one of the other talks. So there are the other phrase you could call them is sort of whole home electrification contractors. And Elephant Energy is one of those. They are started, I think, in Colorado, and they are spreading around the country as well. And what they try to do is if you do it the way I did it for my home, I dealt with a half dozen different contractors, and I had to figure that out myself. And I had to interview 7 people for my heat pump and so forth. So companies like Elephant Energy will usually start with an energy audit, as I talked about, and then they will basically develop a plan, help you develop a plan for you, working with you, of course, and what your goals and priorities are and your budgets and so forth. And then they will do it kind of as a system. And that is, it makes sense to look at your house as a system. So they will look at, weatherization, and then getting the heating and cooling loads as low as possible, and then finding a heat pump that will be appropriate for that more efficient home, more energy efficient home. And then they will help you with electrical service that may be needed to power all the new electric devices. So there are some companies like that. There's another one in our area that's relatively new. They started off attached to a building design and construction company. Typically, certainly in the case of that company, they tend to be more high priced than doing it yourself. so doing it, as a integrated process can often be more expensive, but it does take a lot of the hassle out of doing it yourself. Let's see, other questions, Pete, that you've looked at?
Yeah, there's one from Sandra about how would heat pump water heater would work for condominiums that have shared or central hot water. It's frequently referred to as domestic hot water when you get
Right.
into multifamily. And the good news is there's a heat pump for that. And basically, there's two approaches. You can either just make a bigger heat pump which would be bigger compressors and heat exchangers and fans, or you can use a cascading series of heat pumps that are similar to residential size or more. One trick with as the building gets larger, you want to have essentially hot water circulating through the pipes, just like some high-end homes have. And you can't do that directly with a heat pump water heater if the water coming in is already warmer than it expects, it loses efficiency. And I actually can't tell you the detailed reason why, but it's less important. But so all they do is put a separate tank that is just there to store hot water for that circulation. Anyway, it's pretty straightforward and a good way to go for multifamily or commercial buildings.
One of the things that's big in Europe, but is not so much here yet, is what's called district heating, where you have a centralized heating system. Often we'll be capturing heat during the summer and storing it underground, and then pipes that lead to the individual housing units that can both heat water and space and do that very efficiently. It's a great replacement for the gas company from my point of view, but we haven't seen too much of that yet in the U.S. I see there was also a great question about how to become a coach. That's one I would love to address because we're always encouraging people to do that. And you talked about you've been doing some of this yourself and learning a lot. And that's true of almost every coach that I know is they've been doing it themselves and learning a lot. That was certainly true of me. So I would encourage you to go on the Rewiring America website and apply for the next cohort. They will have probably 3 or 4 courses next year. Those schedules are not set yet. They're developing those now, but you can get yourself on the waiting list for that course. It's about a 4-week commitment in terms of one class each week, and then there's some other office hours outside of that and some assignments as part of the course. You will learn a lot. You will meet a lot of people. It's creating a community of coaches across the country. You may be able to find out about a group in your area or form a group in your area of like-minded electric coaches. So yeah, that's a great thing to do. Almost everyone I know has sort of combined their personal experience with the training they get in the course. And there's a lot of synergy from the combination of those two things. And also with working with people. Every time I work with somebody, I learn something new, something that's different about their home that I have to go do some research on. Other ones, Pete, you want to?
Yeah, Ted in Minnesota asked about, what to watch out for if hiring a paid coach. Probably like anything else, look for certifications. If somebody is saying they're doing this as a professional, you would want them to carry a certification in California, we have the California Association of Building Electrification Consultants. There are other groups nationally, and they're not coming to mind, but look for some.
Building Performance Institute.
Building Performance Institute, BPI.
Mm-hmm.
But look for look for 2 or 3 or 5 letters after the person's name, and then look it up to see if that's actually a thing or if they're just making it up. And then, listen and put your snake oil detector out there, like with any other contractor.
One of the things I mentioned that I talked to 7 different contractors when I was doing my heat pump. And as Pete just said, that was before I took the course. So I know a lot more now than I did then, but I could, just from what I knew at that point, I could start to get a feel for who knew what they were talking about and who was the snake oil salesman. And you know, from interviewing people, you can usually kind of figure out a lot. Especially so the combination of talking to different people, you start to hear the truth out of all that. Let's see what else.
Yeah, and be that pesky client, Well, wait a minute, Sally at 123 water heaters told me this. What do you say about that?
Probably the most common thing you will hear is about heat pumps. And if you're in a part of the country that gets cold, you will probably hear that heat pumps don't work well in extremely cold weather. That used to be true when I had my first heat pump in the early 1980s. It did not work well in cold weather. That is no longer true. So there's a lot of people who will try to sell you natural gas either in whole or at least as a backup. That is an option, but you do not need that. There are heat pumps that will work quite well in very cold weather, and there are definitely electric solutions. So that's one of the things you may hear from contractors that you might want to question. Similarly, when I was looking to replace my 19-year-old gas water heater, I kind of knew I wanted to go electric. I didn't know much about heat pump water heaters at that point. Again, it was before I took the course, and I called my plumber, and he said, "Oh, you'll be very unhappy. You'll run out of hot water." That was his experience, but that's just not true. So, you gotta ask around and ask pesky questions, as Pete said. I see we have another new one here. Let's see. Zero about heat pumps. So sources of education. So there's a lot of good articles out there. If you just Google heat pumps, there's about 3 or 4 that are quite good. Just sort of a basic explanation. The Rewiring America, you heard about the planner in one of the talks. The Rewiring America, in addition to help you build a plan, there is in each section, go to find further information. So there will be a blurb on heat pumps, a blurb on heat pump water heaters to get basic information. So there's a lot you can learn there. And then, of course, this is exactly why we have electric coaches to help answer all these questions. So if you can find an electric coach in your area, they'll be all over heat pumps. If there isn't one in your area, there are other ways. You may find neighbors who have done it and who are going to be knowledgeable. People who are members of other climate organizations like Citizens Climate Lobby have often electrified their homes and will be able to talk to you about their heat pump. So there's word of mouth is often a good way to find out more specifics. Are there specific questions now about heat pumps that we can answer here? And if you want to just unmute, you can just, I guess that was Sandra's question.
Yeah, and I just dropped a note in the chat to sort of quantify or put some detail around what Bob described as heat pumps work better now in cold climates than they did even a decade ago, but certainly several decades ago. 20 years plus ago, the reputation and the truth was they worked well down to around 34 Fahrenheit. Then there was another generation that got down to 13 Fahrenheit. But there's still a lot of places that have a few days or nights per year that get colder than that. And in the last decade, we got to -4 Fahrenheit and then -10. And now they're working on -20 and even -30. The first -20 products are on the market. So it's just heat exchange. It works like your refrigerator. It's magic.
And the good ones that work, that are both energy efficient and effective in colder weather, tend to be, and Pete had this in his chat note, the so-called inverter-driven compressors, or they're sometimes called variable speed compressors. Those tend to be both the most efficient ones and the most effective ones, and are kind of the latest generation. But again, it depends on where you live, because I'm in climate zone 4, which is kind of warmer than California, but it's not New England where I used to live. And here in where I live, the ones that work in the teens, that as Pete just mentioned, are just fine. It doesn't get colder than that around here. If you live in Massachusetts, the so-called cold climate, or sometimes called all-weather heat pumps, of which the Asian manufacturers currently tend to be the best, although the North American manufacturers are now coming out with new models. Those will work well down below zero quite effectively. And so the best heat pump depends on where you live.
What about the ones that have heating and air conditioning?
So all heat pumps, great question, thank you. All heat pumps, that's one of the big advantages, that they are all both heaters and air conditioners.
Okay.
If you live in an area like New England that didn't used to need air conditioning other than rarely, but now does a lot, if you put in a heat pump system, you're going to get a free air conditioner as well as a heater. And it will also, the modern ones will also tend to be a very efficient, energy efficient air conditioner. So that is one of the big advantages. The two big advantages of heat pumps are that one, there are two in one. And the second is they are very energy efficient. The reason they're called heat pumps is that they're not, unlike a furnace, they are not creating heat. They're not using energy to create heat. They are moving heat from one place to another. So through the magic of refrigerants, chemicals, and compressors, they are taking heat out of the outside air, even when it's cold outside, and pumping it inside and heat exchanging it inside, just like your refrigerator does. If you think about it, it's if you got the motor on the bottom, you can feel the warm air coming out. Well, that's a heat pump basically, and it's driving that heat from inside your freezer, which is really cold, right? But it's able to extract that heat even though it's very cold inside your refrigerator. And so heat pumps will typically use 1 unit of energy and generate, on average about 3 units of heat. Whereas any fossil fuel system is going to be less than 100% efficient. So that's the two big advantages are energy efficiency and two for one, heating and air conditioning. And I see Judy, have your hand up?
Yes, I do have a question. We're in Wisconsin, and we've been waiting for the new cold climate models to arrive. And we've actually been talking to contractors right now.
Good.
And we've already gone through 5, and I eliminated 2 by phone conversations because they really didn't seem like they know what they were talking about.
Right.
So we're getting 3, and we probably will keep going. But one of the things that we have forced air, so we have a ducted system. Part of the house is chilly. And apart from the heat pump, we're getting so many different recommendations about ductwork.
Yes.
And also whether to do zoning or whether to do, somebody says, put in a separate unit for another like mini split in part of the house. And then someone else says, well, just kind of, your ducts could be just improved basically and do a little bit, and didn't take a whole lot there. So we're getting stuck now, not so much, I think we have ideas about the heat pumps we might want, and we want one that passed the cold climate heat pump challenge and all of that, but we're getting stuck on ductwork.
So Judy, I just put my email address in the chat. And if you'd like to, I'll carry on a longer conversation here later, but just a few quick things is, first, have you had an energy audit and done weatherization improvements?
Yes, we've actually done attic and insulation, windows. We've done all the basics there. And we're actually getting our 3rd energy audit on Friday.
So often a good energy auditor should be able to tell you something about the condition of your ducts. Okay. And in my case, my energy auditor identified that as an issue and recommended a treatment called AeroSeal, which basically is a way. So if your ducts are exposed, you can seal them from the outside, and that's the least expensive, least disruptive way to do it. But if your ducts are within the walls and your basement is finished, for example, and you can't get access to the ducts, then there's this wonderful treatment called AeroSeal that is basically
Look at that. All the cool kids are back.
Yeah.
I couldn't find any other choices.
So Judy, I see you're back, and sorry.
I am, but I was going to go to something else, but I couldn't find any other choice. So I'm glad I'm back, I guess.
Well, you're stuck with us.
Yeah, that's okay.
If you waited another 10 seconds, they showed.
Okay, maybe I'll see if I.
I
I'll
think
stay
if you
here.
can go, if you can go to the breakout room box, you can probably go join another one. I think
Yeah.
a notice came through that was sort of inviting us to come back, but it wasn't intentional.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I can see the breakout room at the bottom
Yeah.
of my screen. You can switch right now.
Yeah, okay. All right. I may be back, but I'm gonna try to switch.
Okay, well, send me an email, Judy. So those of you who've just joined us, welcome, and it's good to see you all. What we were doing is asking people to put your questions in chat, and that way gives us a way to get started on what would be of interest to the group. So go ahead and do that while we're talking here. We were talking earlier about a lot of times, a lot of the questions come down to heat pumps. It's, from my experience, usually the most complicated, but also the most impactful thing you can do to electrify your home. It's relatively easier to do things like a water heater, but heat pumps often can be complicated, and the solutions vary by the situation in the home, for sure, as well as of course, the location, the climate zone you live in. So, what does a coach charge? So, good question. So, the volunteer groups like mine don't charge anything. We're doing this because we are passionate about helping people do what we have done, both to have better homes, healthier homes, and higher performing homes, but also to one of the most impactful things you can do to help with the climate problem. As collectively as homeowners, we can make about 42% of the problem go away if we electrify our homes and power them with clean energy. So there's a lot of volunteer groups around the country. Most of the groups I talked about in the main session are volunteer groups. We were talking in the last breakout session is there are some companies that do this as a business and give you sort of a whole home solution place to go, one-stop shopping. They will do energy audits and weatherization improvements and advise you on the best heat pump and the water heater, and maybe even have an electrician to do any electrical service work that's needed. That can take a lot of the work and hassle out of it. They tend to be a little more expensive than doing it yourself, but that can be a good solution. There are companies like Elephant Energy that we talked about in the first breakout group that are in that business of the whole home solution. It's also good to have somebody who's in charge of the whole situation, so you don't have people pointing fingers at each other about if something goes wrong. So those are a couple of the different ways of approaching getting help, in addition to from volunteers. So Pete, are there ones you would pick out here?
Yeah, sure. We have it's a bit of a repeat from the previous session, but it's a really important topic. Susan in Somerville, Mass, asked about finding a coach near her, and then also the one I was really focusing on. What about ducting? Either leaving the existing furnace in place and or ductless. And so three parts to that. First, for finding a coach near you in Massachusetts,
Heat Smart Alliance.
Heat Smart Alliance. Bob, do you maybe want to drop that in the chat? And Roger Luckman, who gave one of the intros and is leading a different breakout room, is a part of that and is a coach in Massachusetts, so he can help you.
And they also do training, some good training courses.
Yeah. So then your next piece, Susan, was what about leaving the existing furnace in place? Now, and that is frequently referred to as a hybrid solution. And you can do hybrids with anything where you have two or more devices doing the work. But that was popular and still is, perhaps unnecessarily. That was popular when heat pumps had trouble getting down to 0 degrees F or below zero. I shouldn't say getting to, working properly. But the current generation of cold climate heat pumps are working down to 20 below zero and are essentially fine on their own. Maybe have a space heater for the coldest 2 or 3 nights of a winter kind of thing. But if you leave your existing furnace in place, then what that can do is let you install a non-cold climate heat pump, which might be a little less expensive on the heat pump. In my view, there's a downside to that. You now have two different mechanical systems to maintain and worry about, and there's still a little bit of fossil fuel, but you're probably eliminating 90+% of your fossil combustion by doing that. So the hybrid approach is popular depending on the contractor. Some of them still are convinced of the 30 years ago truth about heat pumps, that they didn't work in cold climates then, so they must not now. And some are having a tough time trusting, in part because they don't want to get callbacks, right? And then the last thing is ducts versus ductless. And I'll add a wrinkle to that. In our case, we had about a 10-year-old furnace instead of ducts. The furnace had a minor problem, but I said that's enough problem for me to replace it with a heat pump. We wanted to reuse the existing ducts, but we were concerned there had been some rodent intrusion, and that can do two things. It can get feces and other contaminants into the ductwork, which you don't want going through your air, and it can create leaks. So we had a test done. They seal up some of the ducts and pump air forcefully through the others, and it tells you a percentage of leak that your ducts have. And we found, yeah, the existing ducts had like a 25% leak. And so we decided to spend an extra $2,500 on replacement ductwork as well as the new heat pump. And then finally, ducts versus ductless. Ductless are classically called the mini split. With ductless, you have very fine grained control of the temperature in every different zone of your house. And that's nice. And it can save you money because you don't need to heat rooms that are not in use, kind of thing. We, at the time, stayed with ducting in part because we had just had a bad experience with an apartment that we were renting out, and the mini split indoor unit failed, and we got what must have been a clunky technician because they misdiagnosed it. It was time consuming, a hassle, and I developed a mistrust. I said, well, why, if I'm going to have mechanical devices, why have 5 indoor units plus the central unit when I could just have the one indoor unit or one outdoor unit, less things to break down? But I think that's probably misplaced. And Bob, you can talk me off of that ledge if you like.
I would just, a lot of good comments there, Pete. The only thing I would add is that if you have ducts in your home, that's usually the easiest way to put in a heat pump. But that's another good reason to have an energy auditor, because the situation that Pete described in his house, and I had a similar but not as bad situation in my house, is the energy auditor can give you some information about the condition of your ducts. And there are things that can be done to improve your ducts if you have problems, depending upon the problems. And if you can either have good ducts now, or if you can do a technique like AeroSeal or other ways to improve reduce the leakage from your ducts, and weatherize your home, then it's usually a pretty good solution to replace a furnace with a heat pump. And then you've got one system that feeds the whole house. The exception to that is that if you have big rooms that are sort of separate, like a big great room or something like that, sometimes you can combine a central ducted system with a mini split for that room, and have it be more efficient and effective. These are the kinds of things that a good HVAC contractor would advise you on the best solution for. But energy auditors can give you a good sort of, what is the situation of your home now, and what problems do you have that perhaps could be fixed? There was a good question that's near and dear to Pete's and my heart. We just gave a webinar for Rewiring America on solar power and battery backup. So yes, there are a lot of alternatives to Tesla Powerwalls now. There's a Panasonic unit, there's an LG unit, there's a Franklin unit, I can't remember them all, that are very similar. Unless you have a lot of them, because one battery is typically about 13.5 kWh. That will not run a heat pump for very long in extreme cold or extreme heat. So if you want to try to run any kind of a heating or system on battery backup, you're going to need a lot of batteries to do that. In addition to that, the solar power tends to decline in the winter when, of course, your heating loads are getting higher. So you're usually better off with things like space heaters to heat a portion of the house if you have a power outage and are trying to operate off of battery with your solar panels. That's my situation. I have solar panels. You can see them in the background there. The production tends to go down quite significantly in the winter, partly because I also have some shading issues when the sun is low with the tree in the backyard. But that's just when my heat pump is needing a lot more electricity, and that's hard to do. That's why we need the grid. Are there, let's see, other questions you would zero in on here?
Two or three people asking about the power outage question, and I struggle with that. Many people like to think, wow, I should keep gas around because I don't want to put all my eggs in the electrification basket. And I resonate with that. But if we all do that, we never decarbonize. We can't efficiency our way to zero.
Well, there's a second problem with that, which is your gas furnace probably won't work without electricity either. Just
going there. Perfect. That's perfect. Many gas devices do require an electrical connection to operate, not all of them. But be sure if you're putting your eggs in the gas basket as a backup, make sure it's actually a workable backup for you. And more than that, anybody who's on this webinar, I'm assuming, understands the importance of electrifying for decarbonization, for our health, and for greater comfort, let's say 364 days of the year. And now we'll focus on the one day of the year when you have a power outage, or two or three. I saw somebody saying more frequent. Be prepared to either have like a fireplace or I hate to suggest this, but you could even use some kind of a propane tank fired heater.
Right.
That's still a fossil fuel inside your dwelling unit, but it's, we do it with gas stoves. So, or be prepared to sort of coast through, your home will only gradually lose heat for the first few hours of a power outage. So, ride with that and get a sweater out, as Jimmy Carter said. Those are all strategies to deal with it, but, we don't love the answer of, gee, there will be times when our mechanical systems don't provide heat for us.
This is a question that comes up all the time in the Rewiring America course. And it's a real question because, power outages happen and you need resilience. Solar panels plus a good battery system is one answer to that, although you're probably going to be just keeping a couple of rooms warm with a space heater in that case. If this is a big problem, a generator that runs on propane is another option because you're only going to be using that, rarely. My son has an all-electric home down in North Carolina, but he's got a propane-powered fireplace in the main great room that would be a great backup in a power outage, especially an extended one. Wood-burning stoves, as Pete mentioned, is another good solution. And those are all things that aren't perfect, but if you're only using them on those rare occasions when the power is out, that's not a bad solution. What other ones do we have here? Yeah, you don't have water without electricity either, right? That's why you should have stored water for that. Let's see. So
I'm just dropping one more solution into the chat. There's a link there to a manufacturer named Bluetti. They're like Jackery and EcoFlow and some of the other companies that make this emerging, exciting category of portable batteries. We're calling them portable power stations or solar generators. But basically, It's a battery with an inverter built in so that it can provide 120-volt electricity. And you can buy these things in half a kilowatt hour or 1 kilowatt hour or 2 or 3 kilowatt hour sizes. Basically, if you bought simply a 1 or 2 kilowatt hour version of these batteries, which you can get for $1,000 or less, that is 2 kilowatt hours is enough to get you through overnight with, lights and refrigerator, the critical things, and probably some a little bit of one room space heating kind of thing. So these portable power stations are fantastic.
And that's what I have in my house. You see my solar panels back there. I have a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery to go with it. And as Pete says, that'll keep my refrigerator going, that'll keep the lights going, and I could keep a space heater going in a room or two as well. And then hopefully the sun would come out and recharge my battery in the morning. So that's the one answer to the resilience problem. Yes, and the battery backup also can be useful in states like California where Pete lives. If you can save from if you no longer have access to net metering, and you can harvest your own power in the daytime and use it in the evening. That can be a good economic proposition in California. And I think Texas too has time of use rates. Let's see, have you seen any others we should pick out, Pete?
Sorry, I'm typing another battery
Okay,
thing
I'm
in
looking
here.
through them
So
as
you
well.
go.
I'm looking. So just to add on, I'm sorry, Carol, you got your hand up. Go ahead. You want to unmute? Go ahead now. You're
You need
still
to
muted,
unmute.
Carol. Still muted. Not sure what happened. There, now you're good. Go.
Sorry. If we thought we were going to only be in the house for another 5 years, what would be the most significant change we could make that wouldn't cost an arm and a leg?
Well, how old are your systems? Is the first question I would ask you.
Okay.
Is there anything that's old and needs to be replaced?
Furnace probably 12 years old.
12?
Maybe older. Can't have solar, too many trees. So, yeah.
So
Maybe.
there's a good body of research now on whether, electrified and weatherized homes have better resale value.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a thing called Pearl certification that you can often get from an energy audit, which their research shows that you can get about a 5% better return on your home by having a Pearl certified home. That usually means you had an energy audit, you weatherized the home, and of course that means you can have lower utility bills. And some or all of your systems are electrified. You get more points depending upon how far along your home is, and that can improve the resale value. I think if you have a really old furnace, a buyer is going to look at that and say, "Oh, gee, I'm going to need to replace the furnace." So if there's a nice new heat pump that also is very efficient and keeps the utility bills down, that could be a selling point. You certainly don't want to run out and replace anything that's new. If you've got a 2-year-old hot water heater, you don't need to replace that. So I would look for the things that are the oldest and would have the biggest impact on your things like your utility bills.
Okay. We live in your area. We live in Rockville, Maryland. So it doesn't get that cold here. What would a heat pump cost?
Well, that depends a lot on the type and the size and some other things. I can give you my example. So I have a 3,000 square foot home. We had it weatherized just after our energy audit. I have a 5-ton so-called heat pump from Carrier, Infinity Green Speed. It's their top of the line. That cost me about $18,000 minus the $2,000 Inflation Reduction Act credit. I could have paid a lot more if I hadn't done my research and shopped around. That was a good price. If you have a smaller size, like a 4-ton, is usually 1,000 or 2 less than the number I just mentioned. If you have so that's if you have a centrally ducted system. If you have if you don't have ducts and you're looking at mini splits, as Pete talked about earlier, that's going to vary a lot depending upon how many zones you have in the house and so forth.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And my quick take on most impactful is if you have a gas range and you want to stop using that for health reasons because it's horrible for us, get a portable induction cooktop for 60 or 80 or $100, or a dual burner one for $200, and use that for the majority of your cooking.
Yeah, we have electric, so, okay.
That is one of the worst things the gas company has done to